thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Last year, I hosted a free monthly photo contest, and over the year, I received 10,176 entries. Thank you all. The contest was, and is, open to all abilities, and it was so interesting to see the same things crop up again and again. I'm going to use community images to show off when things are done well, and I'm going to use my own images and stock images for when things are done poorly, because it's the last thing I want to do is to ever call anybody out, and there were so many amazing entries throughout the year. And I think it's important to note, whether you've been taking photographs for 20 days or 20 years, these are very common mistakes, and I think we're all guilty of them at some point or another on our journey. So this first one is one that I struggle with a lot. So looking at these examples, what do you think the problem is with the original compositions? I think this problem stems from being timid in public, which I'm very guilty of, believe it or not. And another thing that creates this fault is a fix-it-in editing sort of approach. The problem here is taking the photograph too soon and being too far away from the action. Now, how can we fix this? I think the timid approach is using slightly longer focal lengths. For example, if I was shooting at a 50mm equivalent lens here, the composition would have been fine, but I was maybe at a 35 or 40mm instead. So changing your focal lengths to sort of hone in on the action could be one option, or you could go the complete opposite way and widen your focal length and force yourself to get in and amongst the action. It just takes reps like anything else, and it's just a matter of gaining confidence over time. Easier said than done, I know, but it's a very common mistake that I see. I think outside of street photography, this could still also crop up. I think we see compositions with our mind and then assume that things will look the same with our camera when they don't always. So whenever you're taking a photograph, really think about, am I in the right position? Am I close enough to the action? Have I filled the frame with everything that's interesting? And hopefully you'll see some improvements. What do you think could be added to these images to make them different or better? They're not bad by any stretch of the imagination on their own, but I think there are some composition techniques that we could use and some attention to detail that we can use to improve them. So I'm talking about thinking about depth. I think beginners are taught to find the subject, find the story, find the interesting thing and compose it, probably on the rule of thirds, and there's your photograph. Of course, that can be excellent advice because we need a subject in our photographs, but the opposite can also be true. If we only have a subject and no complementary elements around it, it can be more of like a snapshot exercise, you know, like collecting, clack. It's those complementary elements, like adding depth into the scene and adding context into the scene, the supporting cast of characters, if you will, that makes the image stronger overall. I often think about how photographs are a two-dimensional medium that's pretending to be 3D. As photographers, we need to use depth in the scene and foreground, midground, background, shooting through things, framing, all that good stuff, leading lines to sort of sell the 3D effect within our two-dimensional images. And I think beginners are often very much concerned about this plane of the photography. You know, is the eye line on the rule of thirds? Is everything where it needs to be in this axis, and less so much about this? And I think it's the depth that will really add, pardon the pun, extra dimensions to your work. So when you're out and about, think about layers. When you see these images, where does your eye go? Either first or after you've noticed the main subject. I think the eye journey of your viewer, whether that's yourself or somebody else, is really important to keep in mind, because we are effectively telling a story. The way that an eye moves around the scene tells the story of your image, and humans are all sort of hardwired to do this in a certain order as well. It's quite interesting. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But where does your eye go in this? What is distracting? A very common problem that I see in photography is cluttered edges. This is something that you just need to finesse over time. A great tip is just like before you take the image, just scan the edge of the scene and make sure that everything in the scene you want there and everything out of the scene you want there. Anything that's sort of in the halfway house doesn't look deliberate and looks sloppy. Now, of course, you can tidy this up in editing very easily. We have access to like eraser tools and things, but it's always best practice, if the environment allows, to get it right in camera. Sometimes if you're shooting street photography and you're concentrating on all this fast-paced stuff, you might not notice something. And then I'd say it's fine to edit that out in post. But if you're shooting a landscape, for example, and nothing's moving, it's on you as a photographer to get your position right. Even taking one step in one direction can really tidy up and enhance your image. This one is another one that I suffer with all the time because I am too impatient. What do you think about these photographs? How would you make them better? This is a tricky one because the location is stunning, the compositions are right, there's nothing overwhelmingly wrong with these images at all. However, I would argue that these are the right place at the wrong time. And this is something that I see so much in other people's photography and my own. I think because we all lead busy lives, sometimes we go out and grasp the time that we have available to us to go and shoot. And sometimes that might be 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a blindingly bright day, but you have to take the opportunities when they come, right? However, the time of day and the lighting that you are utilizing is one of, if not the biggest aspect of photography. So if you find an amazing place, like for example, you're in a city and you've found a spot where everything lines up and you've got subjects walking by and the stars are aligning, but you're there at the wrong time, have a bit of patience. Make a mental note of this location and come back to it. Maybe at the morning or maybe at golden hour. Maybe you want it sort of with longer shadows. Whatever it is that will enhance that place in your mind, come back at the right time. Because there's two really frustrating things as a photographer, and let me know if you can relate to this. Number one for me is wrong place at the right time. So if I'm driving home and the sky is amazing and I've got nothing to photograph and nowhere to be, that annoys me so much. I'm like, what an amazing sky, and it's wasted. However, the second most frustrating thing is perfect place at the wrong time. You know, this is a 6 out of 10 shot, but it could be a 10 out of 10 if the lighting were more pleasing. So get into the habit of location scouting, returning to the same place numerous times, and being a little bit more mindful about planning your photography shoots. Do any of these examples make you just sort of go, there's just something unsettling to me if you choose the wrong horizontal or vertical line to set your image. So number 5 is figure out your horizontals and your verticals. Pick a team. Find the one that makes the image the most complementary, because if you pick the wrong one, it's in our lizard brains and we just know that something isn't quite right and it can be quite unsettling to look at. Number 6 is often out of our control and sometimes something that we need to adjust in editing rather than in camera. One of the few on this list where I'm like, genuinely fix it in editing. What do you notice within these images? There's a lot of competing colours, right? It can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming to your eye because colour is one of those things as humans that holds what's called visual weight. Visual weight is where your eye is drawn. It's the attention that we give something. And in the hierarchy of things, exposure and brightness and darkness is probably number 1. We are very, very drawn to faces. So that's another thing that holds great visual weight. Colour is a massive one. So if we look at these photos where the colours are complementary and contrasting, where they look nice but like there's one bright, lovely, solid colour for you to aim towards, you know as a viewer where to look. If there's 101 different colours going on, it can be very overwhelming and messy to your senses. I would suggest editing the colours to make it a little bit more cohesive. So the way that I personally like to do this is to roll out purples. Not a big fan of purple, and usually roll out green as well. I'm not the biggest fan of green. And then make the reds more orange, make the blues more green and teal, for example. You can go in the other direction as well. It really doesn't matter. But as long as there's a little shift to make the colours pick a team, I think it can look a lot more cohesive. Like, look at these two edits side by side. We have loads of different colours versus I've tried to shift them vaguely in the same direction. Which is more pleasing to you as a viewer? Now, I'm not saying make everything blooming orange and teal, because that would be really cheesy, you know, like 2008 called Emily. But what I am saying is too many colours can be a mess. Another way around this is if we have strong lines and contrast and lighting, is to edit in black and white. If your composition is strongest because of the light and dark in the image rather than all the colours all over the place, take out the colours. They're not helping you and they're distracting you from your vision. Number 7. What is pleasing about these images when it is right? I mean, there's no right and wrong in photography, but, you know, feels right, we'll say. As a human that's hardwired to look for these patterns, hopefully, even if you've never been taught this, you'll just intuitively know that there is a balance to some of these images, and when the balance is off, it feels less pleasing to look at. One thing I love about photography is, yes, of course, we can read books and we can have education, and I totally highly recommend that, of course. But so much of it is just human nature and what we find pleasing to look at versus not pleasing to look at. If you look at these images, we know intuitively that this part is the main subject and this is a complementary element. But where they're positioned in the scene can make them do a little dance and make them feel quite evenly weighted. Thinking about how your elements balance is something that people should work on, because sometimes when it's not correct, it can just be ever so slightly wrong. It makes the image much less pleasing. Of course, there are 101 ways to get photography wrong. And also, you may argue that there is no right and wrong because it is just a creative pursuit, and if the photographer makes those decisions deliberately, then there is no right and wrong. So I'm not saying that any of these things are objectively the incorrect thing to do. It's just in my experience as a photographer and looking at other people's work, if you do adhere to these guidelines, if you will, you can get stronger images overall. Squarespace couldn't make it easier for you if you are looking to build your own website. They have AI tools that will give you color schemes and font pairings, even sort out the layouts of all of your page. All you need to do is just click what sort of catches your eye, and then Squarespace will do the rest for you. It's really as simple as dragging and dropping. If you ever wanted to sell your own photo prints or perhaps your own merchandise, you can do that through your own website as well. But if you're not at that stage yet, it doesn't matter. You could start at a simple level that Squarespace offer and just have a blog. Just maybe have a landing page and show your own portfolio. And then if you want to expand your horizons as you go, Squarespace can grow with you. And that's why I've stuck with them for absolute years. Even from my first wedding portfolio website was always on Squarespace, and God, I've been doing that for a long time. So have a tinker using the link in the description, and if you are ready to buy, you can use code microphonenerds for some money off your first purchase. So I hope you found this video helpful. Join the photo contest for more nerdy fun, and if you enjoyed this video and would like some more sage photography advice from the resident nerd, do check out this video next, which is 15 years of photography advice in 15 minutes.